What if Mace Windu went to Kashyyyk Part 1 and 2? If you've seen Part 1, I will have a time skip in the comments to take you directly to Part 2. So, let's get into it. In this alternate timeline, the roles were reversed, and the fate of the galaxy was forever altered. In the original story, we all knew that in the midst of the Clone Wars, Grandmaster Yoda took it upon himself to travel to the planet of Kashyyyk to aid the Wookiees in their fight against the CIS. Meanwhile, Master Mace Windu was left on Coruscant, where he had eventually learned from Anakin Skywalker that Palpatine was the Sith Lord they had been searching for. But in this alternate timeline, it was Mace Windu who journeyed to defend the Wookiees, leaving Grandmaster Yoda on Coruscant. It was here where Yoda would learn from Anakin Skywalker the shocking news about Palpatine's true identity. The outcome of this change would alter the fate of the galaxy for generations to come. How would Yoda, known for his wisdom and powerful Force abilities, react to this information? Would he be able to defeat Palpatine and restore peace to the Republic, or would he be faced with new challenges that he couldn't overcome? The outcome of this alternate timeline would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Anakin Skywalker, breathing heavily, burst into the chambers of Grandmaster Yoda. "Master Yoda, I must speak with you," he said urgently. Yoda was in the middle of meditating, opened his eyes and looked at Anakin with a calm expression. "What is it, young Skywalker?" Yoda asked, sensing the urgency in Anakin's voice. "I have just learned a terrible truth, Master Yoda. Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith Lord we have been searching for," Anakin said, still trying to catch his breath. Yoda's eyes narrowed and he stood up. His walking stick clicked on the stone floor. "Disturbing this is," Yoda said, his voice steady. "Your bravery, unnoticed, it is not." But Yoda could sense the conflict within Anakin. He could feel the young Jedi's hesitation and unease. He would not ignore this, and instead, he asked Anakin what was bothering him. "Hesitant, you are." Anakin was silent for a moment, looking down at the ground. He then looked up to Yoda with a forced smile. "I'm fine, Master Yoda. Just a little overwhelmed by the news." Anakin lied, trying to hide his true thoughts. However, Anakin was truly worried about Palpatine having the information that could save his wife from death. The burden of his knowledge weighed heavily on him, and he felt like he was running out of time. He wondered if the dark side truly held the answers he needed. Yoda nodded, his eyes scrutinizing Anakin. "Deceit and destruction, the path of the dark side is. Solutions promised, never truly offered." Anakin nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know, Master Yoda." "Trust in the Force, you must," Yoda said, his voice firm. "The future uncertain it is. In the present we are. Allow the Force to guide you." Some time would pass. Yoda sat quietly in his chambers, deep in thought. The war was raging on and the galaxy was in turmoil. But there was something even more pressing on Yoda's mind. The Dark Lord of the Sith, Palpatine, was plotting something sinister, and Yoda had to act fast. Most of the powerful Jedi were spread thin, fighting on different fronts, leaving only a few at the Jedi Temple. Despite this, Yoda knew he couldn't wait for reinforcements. He had to confront Palpatine, and he needed someone to stand by his side. After much contemplation, he decided to put his trust in Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was a conflicted Jedi, torn between his loyalty to the Order and his love for Padme Amidala. But Yoda saw the good in Anakin. Yoda summoned Anakin to his chambers and informed him of his plan. He wanted Anakin to join him in confronting Palpatine, along with Kit Fisto and Saesee Tiin. Anakin was overjoyed at Yoda's decision to trust him. He felt like the Jedi Order had lost faith in him, and this gesture from Yoda made him feel appreciated and valued. As Anakin, Yoda, Kit Fisto, and Saesee Tiin approached the Chancellor's office, Anakin's mind was in turmoil. He remembered the moment he found out that Palpatine was the Sith Lord. The shock and betrayal he felt was still fresh in his mind. Palpatine was not only a ruthless Sith Lord, but he may also be the only person who had the knowledge to save Padme from death. The thought of losing her was unbearable, and Anakin was torn between his loyalty to the Jedi Order and his love for Padme. But as they approached the door to the Chancellor's office, Anakin's thoughts shifted back to Padme. He couldn't shake the feeling that Palpatine had held the key to saving her. He knew that the Jedi Order wouldn't approve, but he couldn't help but feel that he needed to do anything to save her. As Yoda and the others prepared to enter the room, Anakin hung back for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He felt the weight of his choices heavy on his shoulders. He knew that he had to choose, and the consequences of his decision would change his life forever. As the group entered the office, Palpatine was pleased to see Anakin among them. However, not a word was said between them, as Yoda stepped forward to arrest the Sith Lord. "Under arrest you are, Chancellor," Yoda declared, his voice firm and steady. Palpatine's face contorted into a sneer as he responded, "You fool. Do you really think you can stop me?" With a roar, Palpatine lunged towards the Jedi, unleashing a forced scream that sent shockwaves through the room. The scream impaired Saesee Tiin, causing Palpatine to strike him down instantly. With one less opponent to worry about, Palpatine set his focus on Kit Fisto, but Yoda could see Palpatine's plans. He was attempting to pick off the weak first, but Yoda was ready for him. With lightning-fast reflexes, Yoda jumped between Kit Fisto and Palpatine, engaging the Sith Lord in combat. Anakin, on the other hand, hung back in the background. He was not mentally prepared for the situation and was filled with conflicting emotions. He had not expected the ferocity of Palpatine's attack and was still struggling to make sense of what was happening. He felt pulled in different directions, unsure of what to do. As the battle raged on, Anakin watched from the sidelines, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He knew he needed the help, but his fear and confusion held him back. He felt like he was losing control, and he didn't know how to regain it. He watched as Yoda and Palpatine fought, their lightsabers clashing in a whirlwind of light and sound. In that moment, Anakin realized that he had a choice to make. He could continue to hold back, allowing fear to control him, or he could step forward and do what needed to be done, steeling himself for the battle to come, and step forward to join the fight. As the battle continued, Kit Fisto was disarmed and flung out the window of the tall building, sending him to his death. Meanwhile, Anakin and Yoda continued to fight Palpatine with all their might. They were determined to put an end to the Sith Lord's reign of terror once and for all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Anakin and Yoda were able to defeat Palpatine. The Sith Lord laid on the ground, his body writhing in pain. As he looked up to Anakin, he said, "I told you it would come to this. The Jedi are taking over." Yoda could sense Anakin's confliction, and he intervened, saying, "Our judgment, clouded by the dark side, no longer, Skywalker. Your fate, by you, must be chosen." Palpatine looked at Anakin, his eyes filled with cunning. "If I fall, so does the knowledge to save Padme." Suddenly, it clicked in Yoda's head. Palpatine has been able to control Anakin all along because of a secret love. Yoda spoke, his voice filled with wisdom. "Wrong we were. Love, compassion, qualities of a Jedi." Anakin was filled with a newfound clarity as he realized the truth of Yoda's words. He knew what he had to do, and he prepared himself for the task ahead. With the help of Yoda, he was finally able to reclaim control of his fate. As Palpatine saw that his manipulation had failed on Anakin, he let out a wicked laugh. "So be it, Jedi." He spat, unleashing a wave of force lightning so strong that only Yoda could put up a defense. The wave sent Anakin flying backwards, leaving him unconscious. Yoda and Palpatine were now in the midst of another intense battle, one-on-one. Their lightsabers clashed in a symphony of sparks, each strike echoing through the room. Palpatine was a master of the dark side, but Yoda was a seasoned warrior, and he was not about to let the Sith Lord win. The two clashed, their lightsabers moving at lightning speed as they sought to gain the upper hand. They moved with fluid grace, their bodies twisting and turning as they blocked and parried each other's strikes. Yoda was fast and nimble, his years of experience serving him well as he fought the Sith Lord. As the fight continued, Anakin began to stir. His eyes opened, seeing only a blur of green and red as the two combatants clashed. Suddenly, there was only red, with the Chancellor standing above him. Anakin tried to get up, but he was too weak. He could feel the dark side pulsing through the room. Palpatine would order the clones to come into the room to apprehend Anakin as he prepared to deliver his final strike to the Jedi. Chancellor Palpatine stood before the Galactic Senate, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the room as he called for an emergency meeting. The senators were murmuring amongst themselves, wondering why the Chancellor had summoned them at such short notice. As they quieted down, Palpatine began to speak. "Senators, I have called you here today to inform you of a grave matter. An attempt on my life was made, and the perpetrator of this act can only be none other than the Jedi Order. Gasps of shock echoed through the Senate chambers as the senators sat stunned. Many of them had never considered the possibility of the Jedi turning against the Emperor. For too long, the Republic has relied on the Jedi Order, giving them far too much power and independence. They act as they please, without the regard of law or wishes of the Senate. Their actions have destabilized the Republic and put us all at risk. Palpatine's voice was calm, yet menacing, and the senators could feel the power and authority behind his words. But I have a solution. To save the Republic and bring stability once more, the Jedi Order must cease to exist. They must answer to the Senate and be held accountable for their actions. I propose the creation of the First Galactic Empire, with me as its leader. Together, we can restore order to the galaxy and protect the Republic from those who would seek to destroy it. The senators were silent, considering the Emperor's proposal. Some of them nodded in agreement, while others remained skeptical. But as Palpatine continued to speak, his words swayed the crowd, and they began to see the wisdom in his plan. The Jedi have failed us. They have become a threat to the stability of the Republic, and if we do not act now, we will all suffer the consequences. The time has come to put aside our differences and work together for the good of the galaxy. And with that, Palpatine declared the creation of the First Galactic Empire. With the Senate's approval, the Jedi Order was forever changed. The once proud guardians of peace and justice were now seen as a threat to the stability of the galaxy, and their power was forever diminished. The Republic had fallen, and the Empire had risen to take its place. As the Senate meeting concluded, Palpatine's mind was already turning to his next move. He knew that he had to act fast if he was to succeed in eliminating the Jedi. The Jedi were still unaware of what was happening, as the only ones who truly knew of Palpatine's true nature were now dead or imprisoned. With a sly smile, Palpatine ordered the activation of Order 66, the secret contingency plan that would cause the clones across the galaxy to turn against their Jedi generals. The clones, programmed to follow the commands of the Supreme Chancellor without question, carried out the order without hesitation. Palpatine himself led the charge on the Jedi Temple, accompanied by a legion of clone troopers. The Jedi were caught off guard, caught between the barrage of blaster fire and the relentless advance of the clones. But Palpatine was relentless, his powers growing stronger with each passing moment, as he effortlessly killed any Jedi that stood in his path. As the smoke cleared, the last of the Jedi lay dead. Palpatine stood amidst of the rubble of the once great temple. A wave of satisfaction washed over him as he gazed upon his handiwork. The Jedi Order was no more, and the Republic, now the Empire, was his to rule. The galaxy is mine, Palpatine whispered, a sinister smile spreading across his face. And now, with the Jedi gone, there is no one who can stand in my way.
Anakin Skywalker was trapped in a nightmare that was tearing him apart, sweat pouring down his face as he relived the horrors of his vision. In his mind's eye, he watched as Padme Amidala screamed out for him, her voice echoing in his ears even after he woke up. With a jolt, Anakin found himself back in reality. He was confined to a small, eerie cell, his movements restricted by restraints that bounded him. The cell was cold and quiet, save for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He tried to move, to use the Force to escape, but the restraints seemed to sap him of his strength, making it nearly impossible for him to channel his power. Anakin was left alone within his thoughts, his mind racing with questions. Was Padme okay? Had Yoda survived? And why was he still alive when so many others had fallen? Anakin screamed in anger, trying to break free from his bounds, but his efforts were in vain, and he was left feeling powerless and trapped. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he sensed the dark presence of Emperor Palpatine approaching. The ray shields of his cell flickered off, and Palpatine stepped inside, his cold, emotionless eyes fixed on Anakin. It was quiet for a moment as the two of them simply stared at each other until Palpatine spoke. "It truly is a pity, Anakin," he said, his voice smooth and even. "How much grander and more powerful you could have become." Anakin squirmed in his restraints, his anger radiating off him like a whirlwind. Palpatine's smile was cruel as he continued, "Your anger is like a wildfire, Anakin. Focus it, channel it, and no one will be able to stop you." The Emperor's eyes glinted as he leaned in closer. "The survival of your beloved wife depends on it," he whispered. Anakin's eyes shifted, the irises turning a menacing shade of yellow as the dark side took a hold. Palpatine stepped back, his smile widened as he turned to leave the cell. Anakin was left alone, consumed by his anger and his thirst for power. Padme, Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, Ahsoka, and Bail Organa gathered in a secluded and dimly lit room, surrounded by shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. They sat around a table, each lost in their own thoughts as they tried to come to terms with the recent events that had transpired. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty as they discussed the future of the Jedi Order and the fate of Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan and Mace Windu had been searching for any surviving Jedi and reaching out to them, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The assumption among the group was that Anakin had fallen, but Padme refused to believe such a thing. As she sat at the table, her hand rested on her stomach as she looked down, blinking back tears, her emotions betraying her. Obi-Wan, being perceptive, asked Padme if the father of her child was Anakin. Padme didn't respond with words, but the look of sadness in her eyes confirmed it. Padme suddenly clutched her stomach and winced in pain. It was clear that she was going into labor, and Ahsoka sprang into action, helping her deliver her twins, Luke and Leia. As Padme rested, the others continued the discussion about their next steps. They knew that marching into Coruscant to challenge Palpatine was not an option, and that it would be difficult to lure him out. They decided that it was best to go into hiding for the time being, and that Bail would work to form a rebellion against the Empire. Just as they were finalizing their plan, Bail's guards rushed into the room shouting that the Empire was there and that a Venator had just entered orbit. Mace's eyes narrowed as he suspected that they must have been tracking Padme. As the group prepared to make their escape, the sounds of blaster fire and shouting could be heard from outside the door. Bail's guards quickly alerted that the Empire was upon them and that they needed to act fast. Mace and Obi-Wan quickly assessed the situation and determined they needed to split up in order to reduce the risk of being captured. Bail suggested that he and Padme go their own way. As senators of the Empire, they would be untouched, but Padme refused to be separated from her children and insisted on going with the Jedi. With Padme holding Leia and Ahsoka holding Luke, they all set out in separate directions. The sounds of clone troopers and the soon-to-be Grand Inquisitor was in hot pursuit. The group was soon forced to split up further, with Mace and Obi-Wan going one way and Padme and Ahsoka going another. The chase was intense, with blaster fire flying past them and the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. Padme, still recovering from birth, was struggling to keep up, but Ahsoka was determined to protect her and the children. As they made their way through the winding halls of the building, Padme suddenly tripped and fell, dropping Leia in the process. The Grand Inquisitor was hot on their heels, and Ahsoka knew they couldn't afford to wait. She quickly scooped up Luke and urged Padme to keep moving. In that moment, a critical decision was made. Padme could either continue on with Ahsoka and the children, or stay behind and try to slow down the pursuit. Padme, not wanting to put her children in any more danger, made the selfless choice to stay behind and fight. Ahsoka, heartbroken, but knowing it was the right thing to do, took off with the children, leaving Padme to face the Grand Inquisitor and his army alone. Ahsoka would clutch the crying children in her arms as she soared through the sky in her ship. Her heart ached as she looked into their wide, tear-filled eyes. She promised to bring both of their parents home to them, even though she knew it would be a dangerous mission. The children, Luke and Leia, were the only remaining links to their mother Padme and their father Anakin. When Ahsoka finally met up with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu, they discussed the next steps they would take to keep the children safe. After much discussion, they decided to split the children up, with Luke going with Obi-Wan to Tatooine and Leia going with Mace Windu to Yavin 4. Ahsoka, however, refused to go into hiding. She had a personal mission to find her former master Anakin Skywalker and her friend Padme. She was determined to bring them both back to the children. With a heavy heart, she said goodbye to Luke and Leia and set off on her mission. As Padme was escorted to the Emperor's throne room on Coruscant, she was filled with dread at the thought of what laid ahead. She tried to steel herself for the meeting, but it was no use. The Emperor was waiting for her when she arrived, and his polite demeanor only added to her unease. "Senator Amidala," he said, bowing his head in greeting. "I'm glad we finally have a chance to talk." Padme was wary, but she held her ground. "I'm not sure what you hope to achieve with this conversation," she said, her voice steady. "I won't betray the people I represent." The Emperor smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I understand your concern, Senator. But as the leader of the Empire, my priority is to keep you safe, as well as the entire galaxy. Your democracy has chosen this course of action, and I don't plan on letting them down." Padme would insist. "If that were the case, you would let democracy resume," she said, her voice rising. The Emperor's smile faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "I am afraid that's not possible, Senator. Now, let me help you and your family. They'll be much safer under our protection." Padme was about to retort when the doors to the throne room opened and Anakin Skywalker was brought in, still restrained. The sight of her husband filled Padme with a mix of joy and fear. She tried to run to him, but the Emperor's guard shoved her to the ground. Anakin was screaming, trying to break free, but he couldn't. His eyes were filled with tears, and Padme could see the pain etched on his face. The Emperor walked over to him, a cruel smile on his face. "Maybe a chat with Anakin will sway you, Senator," he said, his voice dripping with malice. He gestured to the guards to move, and then blasted Anakin with lightning from his fingertips. The sound of his screams filled the room as smoke rose from his body. Padme was on her feet now, pleading with the Emperor to stop, but he continued relentlessly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Emperor stopped, and Anakin was unconscious, his head hanging down. The Emperor turned to Padme, his smile returning. "So, do we have an agreement, Senator? Join me, and your family can live on Coruscant peacefully." Padme was filled with tears, and she didn't say a word. The Emperor's smile faded, replaced by a look of annoyance once more. Palpatine then prepared to strike Anakin again with lightning, but Padme reluctantly agreed to his terms, just to protect her husband. "So, do we have an agreement, Senator?" Palpatine spoke, with a smile appearing on his face. Padme reluctantly agreed, under the condition that her family would remain safe. Palpatine had a smile on his face as he said, "Of course, my dear."